Welcome to a new video. Why are there not as many skyscrapers in Europe as in Asia? Despite being one of the most developed, populous and prosperous continents in economic and industrial situation, few skyscrapers are in Europe. What makes it surprising? Especially when compared to Asia and North America. Of the 218 skyscrapers built on the continent to date, 66% are in just 5 cities: London, Paris, Frankfurt, Moscow and Istanbul. So why haven't other major European cities embraced skyscrapers? Especially with the availability of vast areas of land that can be used in the construction of modern and sophisticated skyscrapers, unprecedented in the world. Why don't European countries like Asia and North America build skyscrapers? When skyscrapers first rose in the 19th century, first in Chicago and later in New York, many European cities had already sprung up out of historic buildings and public spaces unless they left little room for new megastructures. Most European cities at the time were also more balanced in terms of population and population distribution over the land, and there was no increased demand for land areas in the main areas that are usually the sites of high-rise development. Additionally, as North American power and influence began to grow, a cultural rivalry emerged between Americans who saw the caste system in ancient Europe and Europeans who saw some American examples as undermining European traditions and way of life. As a result, every continent has become wary of embracing the concepts of others. While North America aimed to become a model for a new age, Europe sought to preserve its urban and historical heritage. While this explains why skyscraper construction was not widespread in Europe at first, it does not explain why the continent has declined since then. Post-war reconstruction. In the aftermath of World War II, many believed that European cities would modernize and replicate the skyscrapers that were rising across North America. However, in Western Europe, where many cities have lost historic landmarks and notable historical structures, there was a burning desire to restore what had been destroyed. In addition, the declining population in Europe at that time caused people to build modest buildings and move away from gigantic structures. Meanwhile, in Eastern Europe, the expanding Soviet Union's rebuilding effort consisted largely of repetitive, mid-rise structures that sought to resettle much of the population. During this time, Europe saw its first skyscrapers begin to rise, not in response to growth and prosperity, but in an attempt by the Soviets to signal their power and influence. Brussels, the city responsible for the lack of skyscrapers in Europe. Without any significant zoning regulations, the 1960s saw many buildings in Brussels demolished to make way for large, modern buildings that had no regard for architectural or cultural value. Recognizing the damage this haphazard redevelopment has done to the city, many notable personalities and architects coined the term Brusselization and lobbied for the introduction of new planning rules. These regulations greatly limited the size of new buildings and required the restoration of historic facades and their incorporation into new developments, preserving the city's cultural fabric. The controversy in Brussels led to a general dislike of modern buildings across Europe as many considered them shoddy or soulless. In response, many cities have adopted similar regulations and carved out controlled areas, such as La Défense in Paris, to keep tall buildings away from historic centers. Urban age. By the beginning of the 21st century, attitudes about tall buildings had subsided across the continent as architectural trends moved away from box-like structures towards more distinctive designs with the increasing globalization of the world. Since the early 2000s, major financial centers such as London, Paris, Moscow, Istanbul and Frankfurt have seen the number of skyscrapers rise with increased demand for commercial space in their centers. By contrast, smaller European cities that experienced modest growth shifted their focus to the environment and improving living standards for citizens. In recent years, urban areas in Scandinavia and Central Europe have ranked among the highest in the world in terms of sustainability, happiness and well-being while maintaining their economic importance in the country. However, the construction of skyscrapers in today's cities is no longer driven solely by economic growth or the need for commercial office space. With 60% of the world's population living in urban areas by 2030, residential skyscrapers are now on the rise, particularly across Asia and North America. As many traditional rural industries become automated, millions are migrating to major cities and urban areas, increasing the demand for residential space often filled with tall buildings. However, with the desire to properly preserve as much culture and architecture as possible to this day, the unique challenge of building future skyscrapers in Europe relates to the past. If you like the video, do like and subscribe to my channel.